Welcome, and thank you for standing by. All participants will be able to listen only until the question and answer portion of today's conference. To ask a question, please press star 1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn your conference over to Ms. Linda Abbruzzese. Ma'am, you may begin.
Thank you, and good morning for those of you joining on the East and West Coast. Thank you for joining us for our Navigating the New China webinar. I'm pleased to add that we have many participants for today's webinar. My name is Linda Abbruzzese. I'm a Senior International Trade Specialist for the Global Knowledge Center of the U.S. Commercial Service at the Department of Commerce, and I will be today's moderator. This webinar is being brought to you by the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service and Crown College of the Bible. I'd like to welcome all the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service clients, as well as other participants joining us and students to learn about the market drivers and opportunities in China for U.S. companies and how the U.S. Commercial Service can assist them. In a moment, I'll turn this presentation over to Dr. Peter Banfi, who's the Dean of the School of Business Applications at the Crown College of the Bible in Powell, Tennessee, and also Ms. Kathy Feig, Commercial Officer for the Foreign Commercial Service of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And then we will have Ms. Natalie Levine, the International Trade Specialist of the Global Knowledge Center in Washington, D.C. All of them will be speaking, and these are our speakers for today's webinar. I'd like to let you know that we will be taking and answering your questions at the end of the presentation, and also contact information will be provided. Now, I just want to let everyone know some of the housekeeping details to make sure they get the most benefit from today's webinar. You're going to be hearing this presentation via your telephone, and you can see it or view it simultaneously via computer. So if you're not hooked up through both, please take a moment to do this. And if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please press star 0 anytime during this presentation. During this webinar, we will be taking written and voice questions. To ask a voice question, please press star 1. And if you do have a written question, we do invite you to type in your questions on your screen as they occur to you. On the upper left-hand side, you will see the tab that says Q&A. And if you put your mouse cursor over that tab, you can type in your question anytime during this presentation. What we will do is we will compile these questions and present them as time allows. And any type questions that you might have during this webinar that we did not answer, we will get back to you via a personal email. And now I'd like to introduce live online the Dean of the School of Business Applications at the Crown College of the Bible in Powell, Tennessee, Dr. Peter Banfi. Peter, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Linda. My name is Dr. Peter Banfi, Dean of the School of Business Applications at the Crown College of the Bible in Powell, Tennessee, host of this webinar. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all the participants. I've been working with the U.S. Commercial Services partners in educating young college students and potential exporters for many years. We're very fortunate to have such a skilled and knowledgeable group of people on our team as we work to increase U.S. exports through training and education. I recommend that you get prepared to take lots of notes as the speakers unveil critical information on the exciting China market. Our next speaker is Kathy Feig.
Thank you, Peter. My name is Kathy Feig. I'm a commercial officer with the U.S. Department of Commerce. For those of you who aren't familiar with what that means, it just basically means I work for the Department of Commerce. I'm in a small quadrant of the Department of Commerce called the Commercial Service, and basically our job is to help small, medium-sized enterprises sell their products overseas. I'm going to first explain what the Commercial Service does, and then I will go into a little bit about the China market itself. This slide here shows you that the mission of the Commercial Service is to help small, medium-sized enterprises sell their goods abroad, basically. We do exports. We don't do imports. What we do for larger companies, they usually don't need us to help increase their exports. We do help them with advocacy overseas if they're bidding on a project. We can go over and, talk to the people who are the decision makers and promote the U.S. company. The Commercial Service is actually a network. We have a domestic side that's in about 108 offices across the U.S. There's 3 in Tennessee. And we're also overseas in consulates and embassies around the world. We're probably in about 70-some-odd countries right now. And those two sides work together. The idea is the U.S. company starts with their domestic office that's closest to them, and they discuss what markets they'd like to approach and, how best to do that. And then that office will reach out to the overseas office to make that happen. So basically, say, for example, if it's China, if they want to find a distributor in China, that local office will reach out to the offices in China, find out if there's market interest for the product. If there is, they all get on a conference call and talk about how to market that product in China, and then they can proceed with helping them to find a distributor. And the way we do that overseas is that our overseas offices are made up of an officer or 2 or 3 like myself, and we turn over every 3 or 4 years. But we hire our staff local, and so they stay 5, 10, 15, 20 years. They specialize by industry. They know the players in the industry. They know the government agencies that work with that industry. They follow the rules and regulations as they change, and they also do the market research for that industry. So basically your local office here would reach out to the officer and the local staff that handle the industry that the company is with. And the con call would be with that local staff, with the U.S. company, and with their local U.S. Export Assistance Center person. So that's how we would help a U.S. company begin to sell their products in another country. This slide here basically gives you a picture of where we're located in China. We're actually only in 5 cities in China. We're in Beijing, Shenyang, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Chengdu. But we partner with a Chinese government agency that has our same mission. And they, in the cities we're not in, you can see here they're in 14, I think maybe 15 cities now. They actually help the U.S. companies do the same thing we do, where it would be to find a distributor. And we help them find a distributor with a fee-based service. It's $700 per city for a small company, which is less than 500 employees. But there's a lot of stuff you can use our offices overseas for if you're a U.S. company. That doesn't cost anything. If you just basically want to find out if there's market interest in that country, that doesn't cost you anything. If you want to do an informational email exchange or con call with the staff, that doesn't cost you anything except for time. And so there's a lot you can use our offices overseas for that doesn't cost, just to kind of find out where your lowest hanging fruit markets are, things like that. So this is the outline for the presentation today. Basically, I'm going to talk about what's going on in the China market, and then we'll talk about what that means for U.S. companies, including business opportunities in that market or the current opportunities in that market. And then the last part is going to be how the commercial service can help. So China recently did a government shift or a handover, if you guys have been following China. So now we have a new president, new premier. The new president is Xi Jinping. The new premier is Li Keqiang. We don't expect a lot of change, actually, with the new government. We know what challenges they have. They're the same challenges that have existed before. It's environment. It's the growing income gap between the rural and the urban areas. But we don't expect any big change because these guys have been groomed for a handover for years. So we expect more of the same. They are talking about cleaning up corruption. We'll see if that continues, but they do seem to be buckling down on that. What I want you to see on this slide is the part where it talks about the 40% service. So everyone knows China for manufacturing and industry is big there, but the service industry is growing. So if that's an industry you guys are in, there's a lot of potential now in the China market for increase in services, legal, consulting, insurance, things like that. It's definitely growing there. That last bullet point is already outdated. I saw in the news this morning China's foreign exchange reserves are now up to $3.4 trillion. And you probably did see recently that, there's some concern about China's debt, but it's this foreign exchange reserve that's kind of muting down the concern on that because it's a good counterbalance. This slide talks about that growing income gap I mentioned. So the top line is the urban per capita disposable income. Now, if you're selling a product in China, chances are really good you're marketing to the middle class. That's who you're marketing it to right there. So you can see how the disposable income is really growing there. Now, something else you can see on this slide is that gap, the income gap between the rural and the urban. And that's a concern of the Chinese government. They need to keep peace there. So if the folks in the rural areas are seeing their urban counterparts really get more disposable income and they're not keeping up, they're going to get disenchanted. And so that's something the government's really trying to work on. So they'll be doing some programs and stuff to help the rural areas keep up with the growing disposable income in the urban areas. On this slide, you can see how many cities are in the U.S. and how many are in China, each with a population of 1 million or more. So you can get a picture in China that there's just a lot of large cities, but you should also take note that they're all on the eastern seaboard pretty much. The western area of China is definitely much more rural. On this slide also, you can see that there's a growing middle class. That's, again, who you're probably marketing to, and the growth is just amazing to see their income. What you end up with is a lot of 20 and 30-year-olds whose parents, had a lot of hardships and stuff like that, so they save really well. Well, the 20 and 30-year-olds really aren't saving like their parents did. They're the first ones to be trying out credit cards, debit cards. They're doing a lot of online shopping, which I'll touch on later. So really the market, the group that you're marketing to in China is growing dramatically. The other thing you can see on this slide is at the top part, the urbanization. The Chinese government is actually encouraging some people to move from the rural areas into the urban areas for that exact reason about that income gap. And finally, it's actually already happened that it's over 50% now that live in the urban areas in China. So that's growing. That will increase incomes as well, and it will also increase the folks that you're selling to, their income status. What you see on this slide is the second and third tier cities in China. Now, if you haven't heard that term before, that's a term to hang on to. The tier 2 and the tier 3 cities. The tier 1 cities, of course, are Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou. Everyone goes there. When we have companies come to China that don't know China, they want to go to Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou. But those of us that are there tell them, consider the second and third tier cities because those are where you have less competition, you have less cost, you have a lot of money yet, and they still want to buy quality. I'll give you an example of that. If you look up in the northeast, you can see a city with a red dot called Shenyang. That's the last city I was posted to in China. I was there from 2009 to 2011. Now, I arrived there from Beijing. Beijing was a city of 18 million when I lived there. Shenyang is a small town of 7 million, and it honestly felt like a town coming from Beijing. Beijing has a massive metro going on. The streets are always crowded. In Shenyang, the streets were crowded during rush hour, but that was about it. There was no metro. The subway was just being built. By the time I left in 2011, they had one line that ran east-west across town. They were building a second line, and that was really the max of their goal at that point. Yet Shenyang had so much potential for U.S. companies. It was so easy to do my job there because you have a lot of money. You've got a lot of money coming from real estate. That's also a heavy industry area, so there's a lot of money coming from mining. And the folks that work for SOEs are usually pretty well off as well. So I drove a Jeep Liberty in Shenyang, and in my parking garage, it was surrounded by 3 Mercedes, 3 BMWs, and 2 Lexuses. And the 2 Lexuses were owned by my apartment landlord, who also owned 2 other apartments in the building, one that they rented out to Boeing, and the other one they lived in. So there's just a lot of money everywhere there, and they want quality, and they know they can't buy quality. We used to have companies come up to us and say, for example, they were looking for some solar panels. They would say, I want to buy these solar panels from the U.S. I know we make them here, but I'll be replacing them in 3 years. And so I want you to introduce me to this U.S. company, this U.S. company, and this U.S. company. So it's really easy to do our job. And Shenyang is arguably a third-tier city, not even a second-tier city. Even though it shows on here as second tier, we really actually felt like it was a third-tier city because it's just definitely, they had maybe 4 Starbucks when I arrived. Probably 7 when I left. So, it's just not really what you would think of as an international city at all. And so there's a lot of potential in these second, third-tier cities that U.S. companies should really consider. Now, when you go to these second, third-tier cities, you're going to need an interpreter the whole time. You're not going to feel comfortable going out to a restaurant and ordering. It's much more a place where you would need Chinese. But for those that have the guts to do it, it's really a much better way to get a jump on your competition in China than going to Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. Okay, moving along. This gives you a picture of the economy there, and this slide really is a capture of your 20 and 30-year-olds. Mobile phones, everyone has a mobile phone there. They don't really have house phones. They don't have voicemail on their phones, even on the mobile phones. Ministry of Commerce doesn't have voicemail there. It's just something that skipped China. Also on the business cards there, you'll often see a personal email address like Hotmail or Signer or something, .com. They don't necessarily have corporate emails like we do. Internet, very big. Private vehicles. When I left China in 2011, Beijing was adding 2,000 cars a day to the road, which is now the problem you see with their air pollution. and Shenyang was adding 700 cars a day to the road. So right now you've got a lot of families that still have just one car there. So there's a lot of potential for growth. The problem is the roads can't handle it because Beijing is already gridlocked even on a Saturday afternoon. So they've got some work to do on that. But it's definitely a good area of growth, and you can see that the economy is really booming. Outbound travel is also really increasing, as is outbound education, which I'll touch on later. But that's another sign where you can see that they're getting a lot of disposable income. So your luxury consumption, the interesting bullet point on this one is the second one, where 80% of the buyers are under age 45. And you can see in the parens there that that number is only 50% in the U.S. And what's interesting is that last bullet where 40% of them are under the age of 35. So that's your 20s and 30s that are really beginning to experiment with, life is good. They haven't known anything but upward mobility. And they've got credit cards now. They're trying those out. So, it raises two questions. It definitely increases our ability to sell products there. But, it also raises the question of, are they going to have the debt crisis down the road that we did? And they need to watch that. Now, if you're selling a more high-end product like yachts or luxury cars or the brand-name consumer products, China has 1 million millionaires. And we gauge that by U.S. dollar 1.5 million. You can see on the right where those are located, but what you'll notice is the majority of them are on the eastern seaboard area. Now, the interesting point on this slide is that the Chinese millionaire was born in 1972. So they're definitely 15 years younger than their Western counterparts, which is remarkable. And a lot of that is also new money. You don't have a lot of old money in China like you do in the United States. And they have some billionaires, too. They have 4,000 renminbi billionaires, lots of self-made billionaires. And, again, it comes from real estate, from mining, from, heavy industries, things like that. You have some in the southeast that come from light industry as well. The average age of your Chinese billionaire is 44 years old. China also has its problems, as we've all seen in the news. Environment is a big problem for them. And the government realizes that China does these 5-year plans. Right now we're on the 12th 5-year plan. And so it started from last year, and these 5-year plans are just basically lay out what the government's going to focus on working on for the next 5 years. And then the central government writes it, and then they pass it down to the provincial and the municipal. So everybody writes matching 5-year plans to that. In the respective industries, they have them per industry. But one of the things they really want to work on is their environment, and it's air and it's water. They have a huge problem with both of those. So I'll touch more on opportunities in those industries in a little bit later on. So now let's touch on what does this mean for U.S. companies. There is an American Chamber of Commerce in China. There's actually quite a few, but there's one in Beijing, there's one in Shanghai that poll their member companies. And their member companies are U.S. companies that are based in China. And they basically poll them each year and give us feedback on what's going on. So this one is probably from the 2011 survey, and basically it just shows what's of issue. Now, what's interesting on this, bureaucracy, these things will always be on there for the most part. Unclear laws and regulations, unclear regulatory interpretations, these things are a little bit lower on the list than they used to be. What also they see is uneven interpretation of the regulations depending on where you are in China. The interesting thing to me on here is that the IP infringement issues, this is your intellectual property. So, for example, China copying your product, this is much lower. It used to be at the top of these lists. So this has really dropped down a lot. And what we have seen is China starting to take action on this. Cases can now go to court. There is compensation. What's interesting is it's not always the foreign company that wins. China's the first to file country. So if someone else files your patent there or your copyright there before you do, then they legally have rights to it. So we have seen some cases where the U.S. or the foreign companies don't win. But this is definitely lower on the list than it used to be, so that's good to see. Something that's not on this list that I expect to see on it next year is labor costs. Labor costs have been rising 20-30% almost annually in China lately, and it's really becoming a problem. So it's no longer the cheap place to manufacture. If you're thinking of manufacturing in China because it's cheap, you missed your window, really. You need to be looking at other countries in either Central America or Southeast Asia or something. That's not to say it's not a good place to manufacture, but, it's good to manufacture there if you're using it to make an Asia base, to sell into other Asian countries or to sell into the Chinese market. But as far as cheap labor to bring back to the U.S., you're starting to see a lot of reshoring, and one of the reasons is because of labor costs rising in China, and they're going to continue to rise rapidly. So I'm surprised that's not on here. I suspect it'll be on here next year. The human resource constraints. One problem I always heard from U.S. companies in China is they can't get someone straight out of a Chinese university that's ready to go into a lower or middle management position in a U.S. company. And that has to do with the different education styles. You know, in the U.S., if you're in university, we want you to challenge and question and, you know, come up with new ideas and things like that. In the Chinese university, it's really all memorization and recitation and doing what you're told. And so when a U.S. company wants someone to come out of a Chinese university to go into that management role, they want someone to take initiative and manage, and these guys aren't coming out trained to do that. So I used to talk to Chinese student groups, and they would say, should I go to the U.S. and study? And I would say, yes, you should, and the reason you should is you should go there and study, but don't stay. Come back. You can be near your family. You can work in the U.S. companies, and then they'll have what they're looking for in their middle and lower level management positions. Here's some more feedback from those the surveys that the MGM did. And basically, if you just scan over it, you'll see that it's positive. You know, U.S. companies in China are quite optimistic about how it's going there. They expect to increase their revenue, and they expect to increase their investment. And here's some more where you can just see that they are doing really well. They are profitable. So the Chinese market hasn't really been hit as much. Now you're starting to see it slow down a little bit, but it's still growing at 7-point-something%. So, you know, it's really doing okay. It's getting hit a little bit by the economy in Europe, decrease in demand for the exports from China. Now, to solve that, the Chinese government is trying to turn the economy in China to be more of a consumer economy than an export economy. So they're trying to encourage consumption in their markets. And it'll be a slow process because they're dealing with generations and generations that are used to saving because they didn't have the social safety net that they needed. I'm going to touch on some best prospects in the China market for the next few years. You can see the list here. Of this list, the ones that really catch my eye, energy by far is going to be one of the tops. It's going to be clean energy. Water treatment there is going to be another big one. And the green build is also a big one. That's definitely something that they're trying to lean towards. You also see things like aviation, automotive. Those will be big. The rail is big because they're trying to build a lot of high-speed rails across China right now. And they're trying to do that to reach further into the West and things like that as well. But this is just a general list of the hot industries in China right now. So let's walk through some of those. Healthcare, definitely one. When I left, they were really trying to set up a network where they would have hubs, and they would have like a regional, in Shenyang, for example, the government hospitals in Shenyang would actually take care of the ones in the rural areas outside. So if the ones in Shenyang got newer equipment, they would pass their other stuff to the rural areas. They're trying to do a lot of training. We actually brought a nurse delegation stateside that had government funding to go to the U.S., to Europe, and to Australia to learn the best practices in the U.S. hospitals, what medical equipment they were using to make sure that theirs was the most current. If it was, they wanted training on it. If it wasn't, they wanted to buy more current medical equipment. As far as selling medical equipment into that market, there is a lot of regulations and barriers and clearances you have to cross, but once you do, it's a very hot market to sell into. You can see now also on there that the public hospitals are fading out. There's more private coming up. We saw that. They're trying to market to both the expatriates and to the rich Chinese, just better quality hospitals. In China, everyone goes to the hospital just to see a doctor because that's where the doctors are. So you wait in a long line. If you want to see a doctor, you wait in a long line, and when you get your appointment, you might end up sitting at the hospital all day before you get to see your doctor. So the private hospitals are much different than that. You can basically either make an appointment or just go in and see one. They're a lot less crowded. And they're also working on insurance. They're starting also to have insurance for the rural areas because in the past, you know, the government took care of them and then they had nothing. And so now insurance is a very big thing and rising in healthcare in China. They also have an aging population, and it's something that society hasn't really dealt with before because they always took care of their aging parents, but now everybody's working. And so we recently did a tour, roadshow, with companies that worked in elder care, like, you know, nursing homes and things like that. That's something China's beginning to look at. The second half of this slide, the power gen, you can see that renewable energy is very big there. What happened in, I don't know, maybe 2010, China put a lot of money behind companies developing wind power. So everybody went out and developed wind power. But then they ended up with a lot of wind power, but it wasn't connected to the grid. So now they're trying to get all their clean energy connected to the grid. They're going to work on nuclear, wind, not so much hydro, although there is potential for that in some places. But the big thing here is get clean energy and get it hooked up to the grid. The ECP you see on the bottom of that is our Energy Cooperative Program, and it's something that the U.S. Embassy and AmCham set up. It basically hooks up U.S. companies with the Chinese government and the local governments, and they're just working together to actually get clean energy in there. And, you know, it gives U.S. companies access that have technology like this. It gives them better access to the Chinese market. Here you see green build. When you see on the right-hand side, you see where it says 12/5. That means it's in the 12th five-year plan. And if something's in the 12th five-year plan, it's a pretty safe assumption that the government's going to put money behind it, so it will do well. So green build is definitely something. LEED certification is big right now in China. In fact, there is a Commerce Department grant program called China Green Build. And they take delegations of U.S. companies twice a year to China, where they just do demos of their products to an invitation-only audience. And then they tour about 3 different cities. I think they're leaving this weekend for the spring one. And so there's a lot of desire on China's part to learn about green build and how they can make their buildings more efficient. The bottom half of this slide, the environmental tech, you can see on the bottom equipment to clean up the air, also in the 12th five-year plan, and the new water purification. There's a big problem with clean drinking water in China and ailments that come with that. And you've seen in the press about the air problems that they're having in Beijing, other areas, just really a huge pollution problem. It's certainly complicated by both the industry growth and automobiles. I was in Beijing for during the time of the Olympics, and so to clean up the air in Beijing for the Olympics, they did several things. First of all, they had a big steel plant out on the western side of Beijing. So instead of putting scrubbers in the towers to clean the pollution up, they just moved it out into the countryside. So the government paid to move it out to the countryside. And then they shut down certain pollution-producing factories. I think 2 months out, the heavy polluters like the coal and the cement had to close. And then 1 month out, the other ones had to close. And then they took the cars off the road, and we drove every other day. And like maybe a week before the Olympics, we'd done everything we could do to clean up the air there. And I was in a taxi, and it was still smoggy. And I said to the taxi guy, you know, we've done everything we can do now. Now how are we going to get the air clean? And he said, you know, we can take cars off the road, we can close factories, but we can't make wind. We need wind. And the first week of the Olympics, it was a little bit smoggy, but by week 2, it was fine and cleared up and blue skies with big white fluffy clouds. So, you know, they know what they need to do. It's just a matter of doing it. And it is in the 12th five-year plan, so I do expect it will get better there in the next few years. Rail and metro is definitely big. We have that second, the ARWG there is the American Rail Working Group. That's a working group that we've put together, the Embassy and AmCham put together. It's U.S. rail component companies. A lot of them are based in China, not all of them. Some of them just fly out for meetings. But they do kind of road shows or trade mission things where they leave from Beijing and they'll go up and they'll visit with government officials that are designing a metro in a city or a rail in a city. And everyone who's in the group can cover like everything from retail shops in the train station to the rail, to the radio signals and everything like that. So they're working with the government to get access and get U.S. products in there for that. And you can see the investment, the $500 billion total investment for that. Retail and franchise, definitely a big one, including online retail. It's driven by the 20 and 30-year-olds that are now interested in fashion. In fact, you'll notice the new Chinese president traveling around. He went to Russia, Tanzania, South Africa, and his wife went with him, and that's very unusual. Usually the wives don't travel with him, but they're starting this new thing. And she had all this fashion going. It was all Chinese brands, and all the blogs in China were talking about the fashion, how fashionable she was, and what brands she was wearing. So I do look for an increase in that. I look for an increase in Chinese brands as well for being in high demand. But definitely they're into luxury goods. They do have a growing disposable income, and online shopping is very big, as well as just, shopping malls. The shopping malls there are going up very fast with high-end products and stuff like that. So automotive, like I said, they're adding a lot of cars a day to the road. It's definitely high demand, and families now are getting to where they want to have a second car for several reasons. Sometimes there's restrictions, and you can only drive certain plate numbers on the road on certain days, and some of it is just a status symbol. And some of them, it's, 2 of them working, things like that. So definitely they're going to grow to where they have more than one car in a family. Auto parts are big. Something that's very much being pushed, and even in the 5-year plan, is the electric vehicles. They're putting money into research for these electric vehicles to help clean up the air. So that's something U.S. companies can really compete in, is both the electrical vehicles, everything from the charging stations to the parts that go into it, things like that. RVs are also growing in the Chinese market. We did a lot of work to get access for RVs, so that's another growing concept there. Aviation is one industry that's definitely growing, both because they're increasing their airports. They're building a lot of new airports, and they're also increasing general aviation. It's been blocked there for the whole prior time. My last year in Shenyang, possibly last year and a half, it became a pilot city for general aviation. So there was 2 pilot cities, and they were building general aviation airports. So, China's now interested in general aviation. They're freeing up more airspace for smaller planes. It's another status symbol if someone can afford an airplane. So that's a growing area for both parts related to aircraft, but also for things related to airports. If you have a company that has ability to put fuel systems into airports and things like that, works with safety for airports. And those bottom letters, the ACP, is the Aviation Cooperation. I forgot what P stands for, but it's a group of U.S. aviation-related companies that is helping the Chinese government with their regulations for these general aviation airports and, the safety and the rules and regulations. And they're also, going around helping with the development of these airports and also selling U.S. products in to the new airports and to the general aviation industry. Education is another big one, especially because many people in China are under the one-child system. Everyone's not. There's certain people who are exempt from that, but it's very big. And not only the best education for your kid, but study abroad is very big. And you can see there the public kindergarten is something that the kids all have access to. And it's, as soon as your kid can have access to that, they're jumping out of the preschools and going into that. They're willing to spend the money on things like that. They're willing to spend the money to send their kids abroad. Visas for students was growing by leaps and bounds when I was in China. And so it's definitely a high priority for the parents there. For telecom, you can see the cloud computing cities. That's definitely something they're interested in. They're also interested in things like packaging together for, the phone and the internet and the TV and things like that. They're big on getting more access for these phones. You can see the growth there on which companies, and China regulates which of those companies gets to be involved in what part of the market. So the telecom is a highly regulated industry, but there is a lot of potential there, a lot of growth for semiconductors as well. So how can we help U.S. companies that are interested in doing business in China? These are things that I definitely want to see before I would send a company to China. China definitely should not be your first market. I want to see export experience. Go to Canada, go to Mexico, go to Europe. I just want to, I don't want China to be a company's first market because there's a lot to learn in exporting alone before you add in the trick countries. I want to see a senior level commitment because it's going to cost a lot more than they think it's going to cost. They might be thinking I'm going to send a guy over there to do a trade show and then we can have partners and we'll work from here. But China's one of those markets where you need to do a lot of face-to-face time. I like to see someone there quarterly, if not monthly. So it's going to cost a lot more than they think. So I definitely want senior level commitment. If I have someone who the international manager wants to go but the senior guys don't, it's not going to be successful. And that ties to the financial resources there. It's going to cost a lot more than you think it's going to cost. Due diligence, by all means. If you're not even going to China, if you just get an email about a company that wants to buy your product, I strongly recommend running a due diligence check on that. That is one service we provide. In fact, it's so sensitive in China, we actually provide several different versions of that. We can provide a quick check that just basically makes sure it's a legit company, and that only costs, I think, $100 or $200. We can run a little bit more of a check where we can call them and interview with them and ask any questions you want to ask them. We can do some more in-depth check on who they work with. If you get references out of them, we can call the references and ask what that Chinese company is like to work with, anything like that. And then we have a big in-depth one where we actually run a check to see, do they have any legal issues or any credit issues, things like that. And we used to actually look at their financials. We no longer have access to that, but there's other ways we can get some access to financials. We can tell you who's behind the company, what kind of money went into setting it up. That one costs more and takes longer. That one takes about a month. So usually when companies get an email from China, someone wants to buy their product, the quicker ones are actually all that's necessary. But it's very important to run a check. There's a lot of scams coming from China right now. You get an email from China that says they want to buy an abnormally large quantity of your product. They want you to fly over there so they can do a ceremony or you can sign a contract. They want money up front to pay for your banquet. That is one of the latest scams that's running out of China. Basically with China, if it sounds too good to be true, it really is. Regulatory issues, I want you to know what certifications you have to meet for your product before you go over there. The easiest way to do that is reach out to your local office or to our China Business Information Center, and they can put you in contact with the right people to find that out. Our local staff do know those answers for your product. It's a question they get all the time. And I want you to have an IP strategy. I don't want companies to even go do trade shows in China without having their intellectual property protected, and I'll touch more on that in just a minute. Now, here's some practical tips if you are going to China. Understand the market. View China as many different markets. A lot of companies want to just go to Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou. Well, those are three different regions of China even. So whatever you do, I don't like to see someone sign one exclusive distributor for the whole country of China. It's just too big. And it's so many different regions, and they respect people in their regions. So if you have a guy, it's like having someone in Boston marketing your product in Arizona. He doesn't have the local contact, the local knowledge in Arizona as much as he does up in Boston. Consider the regulations and the standards. You definitely should check that out because it's very likely that you'll have to meet some CCC mark requirements or something like that. And visit often. Go, if you're manufacturing there, you need to be there a lot to check the quality. Otherwise, you still need to be there a lot to, stay on top of your distributor, see what's going on. Protect your interest, do your due diligence check, like I said, register IP, seek legal counsel. Do not sign a contract in China without running it by a lawyer first. I had so many problems where a U.S. company would come to me and say, I wanted the deal so bad I went ahead and signed without having a lawyer check it. And not just any lawyer, but one that knows China. It's just very important because once you get in that quandary of, they're not paying me, and I look at the contract and there's holes everywhere that both sides are taking advantage of, there's really nothing we can do besides, say, get a lawyer. I also want you to have an exit strategy, which means you basically set trip bars. If by year 4 we're not making any profit, we're going to pull out. If we're not seeing this be achieved by year 2, we're going to send that as a sign that we're going to pull out if it's not better by year 4. Things like that. But the catch is don't change. Once you have your exit strategy and you hit year 4 and you're still not turning a profit, don't say we're going to stay 2 more years. Trust that you knew what you were doing when you set your exit strategy. Stick to it. Maybe it's not the time for you. A lot of companies don't make money in China for the first 3 years. Not uncommon. Just know what you're willing and capable of doing and stick to that. So don't start backing out of it. Just assume maybe it's not the right time. And have realistic expectations. Avoid the China-phoria. Again, if it sounds too good, it is with China. So pay attention and talk to as many people as you can. Talk to people. Everyone that's done business in China has something to teach you. So just talk around and get other people's input and take their advice seriously because it very well could be applicable to your product. Here's some do's and don'ts. Do not respond to random emails offering to be your distributor. You will find when you go to a trade show in China, everyone comes up and wants to be your distributor. And then when you check into it, you find out they have no experience with your product whatsoever. It's just that they see it as a fast way to make money. They might be good. They might not be good. Don't just, jump on the first offer that comes to you. Choose your people in China. Don't let them choose you. Do not go without IPR protection. I have a slide on this in just a minute, but I also have someone to send you to. There's a lot of advice out there on IPR in China. It's not my specialty, but please talk to people about it before you go, because you could easily get ripped off there. And again, do not sign a contract without a lawyer. And here's some positives. Definitely research your industry and know your target areas before you go. And there's easy ways to do that. Like I was saying earlier, you can just reach out to our office and just, shoot off a quick email, or have your local office shoot off a quick email and say, hey, is there market interest for my product in China? In other 5 offices, some will come back and say yes, some will come back and say not in my area for different reasons, and I'll tell you why. So definitely know where your target areas are before you just dive into Beijing and Shanghai. Talk to experts again. Talk to people everywhere you run into if you're interested in going to China, because they all have pointers to tell you. Do your due diligence and definitely use a lawyer with Chinese expertise. There's a list on our website. It's export.gov/China. There's a list of business service providers, and there's a legal section on that. And those are lawyers that actually, some of them are U.S., some of them are Chinese. They all do business in China. They know the market. That's certainly a good starting place to find a lawyer. If you need a lawyer that specializes in intellectual property rights to talk to you about how to patent your product, I do have probably at least 3 that I could refer you to for that, which leads me to protecting your IPR. Definitely register in China. There's different ways to register. If you're past the 18-month window and you can't register your patent, I like to say change one thing on it and then file a patent on the newer version. You can also black box one portion of it so that you're exporting that from here and there's no way they can bust into that and figure it out. And some companies I talk to about this say, it's okay. They're training China on their older models, but it keeps them on their toes, and they keep improving the versions that they're using here in the U.S., and then it extends the shelf life of the product, the older products. They can sell those off into China and do training on that. I also say register your trademark there, register your name, but don't just register your name in English, register it in Chinese as well. Because what can happen is you can have a distributor over there, he could register it in Chinese for you, and then he could break away and become your competitor, and he could be using it. So definitely take the proactive stance and register both in English and in Chinese. And again, an IPR lawyer can help you register your name in Chinese. Sometimes it's phonetically, sometimes it's just a pretty name that is similar to your product, things like that. So there's lots of ways to do that, but make sure you register it in both English and Chinese. Here's a slide that the Patent and Trademark Office has. It's got several good links on here. I would strongly recommend, see that bottom link, stopfakes.gov? I would recommend spending a half a day on that website. They have some free webinars on there about China. It talks about how to protect your IPR in China. The top one as well is an embassy website for that, so definitely spend some time on these. That second link is actually a 1-hour free consultation that the ABA has agreed to do for U.S. companies that want to talk about some IPR stuff in China. Now, we all know it's going to take more than an hour, so it's going to cost you something, but 1 hour free consultation is very helpful. So these websites are all very worthwhile. I'm going to run through some special events that we are working on with China. They come from various angles, both the embassy and various offices in the Department of Commerce. The first one you see is a nuclear power trade policy mission to Vietnam and China. If you're interested in this, either my colleague Tally Levine or myself can point you towards the Mass office that's in charge of that. You'll see the shale gas workshops there. China's beginning to learn about shale gas. So there's a lot of opportunities there for companies that are in that industry. You can see the dates. There's quite a few workshops there. Some of them are still yet to be decided on the date. There is a Chinese-U.S. oil spill and emergency response management seminar and expo, and the contacts there are in our embassy in Beijing, and we can certainly put you in touch with them if you're interested in that. And then you can see the groundwater and soil remediation trade mission to China, which is definitely something they need to work on addressing. And again, our contacts there are in the consulate in, he's in Beijing now, he's in Beijing. And he used to be in Shanghai. And also we have some folks here in D.C. that we can point you towards. So here's my contact information. I'm actually doing my domestic tour in South Florida right now. I go back out to China in June for a 3-year tour. I'll be in Beijing this time. But the email will still work. We also have here in D.C. a China Business Information Center, and Natalie Levine is in charge of that. I'm going to put her on just so she can give you a rundown of what the China Business Information Center is and how that can help U.S. companies.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Linda. Kathy, it was a terrific presentation. I won't take too much time this morning, but I just wanted to introduce you all to the China Business Information Center, which is a comprehensive resource for exporting to China. We're basically a virtual resource. I head the program here in Washington, and we have several advisors located throughout the United States who primarily are commercial officers, knowledgeable and experienced, just as Kathy is, and we try to liaise between our domestic offices, our 108 field offices across the U.S., and our 5 overseas China offices. We have an export.gov/China website, several outreach events that frequently happen, and you can also call our 1-800-USA Trade number to talk to myself or other specialists, and if they can assist you. I focus on the China market so I can be reached. So it's a kind of a 3-pronged approach, focusing on customs, transactional, regulatory issues, and we generally try to assist, as Kathy mentioned earlier, small and medium-sized U.S.-owned and U.S.-based companies. Here's Linda Abrazizi.
Thank you, Tali. And now I'd like to, turn it over to our Q&A session. For those of you who have questions, please submit them. We will start with voice questions. So if you have a voice question, press *1, and then we'll go over to Dr. Peter Banfi to get written questions from his students.
Very, very good. I've got a number of questions, good questions from students. Some of them very specific. I know there's a young man in our class who's been thinking about, he's been in construction for many years and thinking about taking and grinding up recycled shingles, and they use those for asphalt, paving, and also for fuel. It's a high heat fuel. And he was asking a couple questions, and here's one. How is the China market for recycled goods? Is there any current government incentive? Do you know of anything like that, or should he get into a private session with somebody about that?
I would point you to our local staff that about the regulations for recycled, because it's broad. As far as us shipping recycled products there for breakdown and cleanup, that's going to diminish. But would they be interested in using recycled shingles? Could be. The question is, what do they use on their roofs? It's not the same kind of shingles we do. And so you need to do some market research on, can your shingles be tailored to what they use there? But recycled gets green, and so it's a plus for the market right now. It's just a matter of, is your product adaptable to their market? Now, the fuel aspect, tell me more about the fuel aspect of it, because that could be of interest. Does it burn clean?
Clean. It's very high heat, and I'm not sure how. You'd have to compare that. I guess we'd have to compare EPA standards to Chinese standards for what is clean. But that's one use for it. The other is for asphalt paving. They actually grind that up, they put it in a container, ship it over, and then they can use it for asphalt paving or for fuel for heat. That's just one example.
Now, the interest in the asphalt paving, again, it's going to, yes is a short answer, but it's going to take some education on their part. We have a service we offer called a single company promotion. Just because they're going to do their asphalt paving a little bit differently than we do here, grinding this up and putting it into the asphalt is just a new technique. Our single company promotion is a service that I like to use when there needs to be some education explained. So the way that program works is we would rent out a hotel meeting room and invite the audience that you would tell us needs to come. If you say, I want the people that build roads, our staff know who that would be, including the government people that would be related to that. We would invite them. And so basically the way it works is you present how your product can be beneficial to what they're doing, but make sure you've done your research to make sure it can be tailored to their product. And then at the end of the presentation, you can do one-on-one meetings with those that are interested. So yes, what might be good is actually to put you on an email with our local staff that handle this type of industry and let them give you some feedback about what part of it is applicable to what's used in China and what isn't.
Very good. All right, I'll move on to the next one. There's a lot of questions here to ask you, so I'll ask another one.
Hey, Peter, hang on. Tally's going to chime in on that one more.
I'm going to chime in. I've worked with a company based in Northern Virginia, and they're trying to export green homes to China. And what I could do is, if you would, the person who asked this question, feel free to contact me independently, and I can put this person in touch with this company, because I think that was one, not necessarily recycled, but in terms of the roof, but in other areas, and there may be some applicable similarities.
Very good.
Okay.
All right. Next question is, how much experience in exporting do you think is needed before you can begin exporting to China?
Years. Do you agree, Tally? Yeah, she's agree. But China might not be your lowest hanging fruit market. You know, depending on what product you have, you might never go to China. You might be better off going to the Caribbean or to Latin America or to Eastern Europe. So just because China has a big consumer market doesn't mean it's a fit for your product.
That makes sense. All right, next, if intellectual property is stolen or violated in China, according to the Chinese legal system, what legal actions can you take?
You can get a lawyer there that does handle IPR. You can take them to court. It's going to be a long process. It can be done. It's just difficult, but you're definitely going to need to get a lawyer in China.
And it can also be very costly in that process.
Mm-hmm.
Next question is, this is a little bit longer. It says, with the younger generation, 20 to 30-year-olds, not saving like their parents did and experimenting more with credit and debit cards, as well as buying more online and purchasing luxury goods, are they setting themselves up, do you believe they're setting themselves up for the kind of debt crisis we're facing here, or is there something about their culture that might mitigate that problem?
Well, I'm going to let Tally come on that, but I do want to say that I look at them and go, you guys need to really pay attention and learn from the mistakes that we made. They do more family chiming in with money. Like, for example, when I was in language training in Beijing, one of my teachers' uncle had to go to the hospital and have a stent put in. And the whole family had to go gather there with all their money so they could find out what the cost was going to be because they had to pay up front. And so they all chimed in with money whenever they found out what it was going to cost. So there is a culture of helping out your family members with money, but this is going to be a whole new thing. You know, I don't really see the older folks being generous as save people from debt of credit cards and purchases, but I do worry about this. Go ahead, Sally.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. I think that to make a blanket statement like there may be a debt crisis on the scale of what happened in the Great Recession that we had in 2008 in the United States it's very difficult without analyzing the fact that many young Chinese people, even now the government is trying to tell them to increase domestic consumption. So I'm not so, overly concerned about that in the near term. I think that there is a cultural reluctance to spend, even though the younger people haven't experienced like the evils of the Cultural Revolution.
Very good. Here's one that just came in. It says, it looks like it's a dual-part question, but I'll ask the first one first. What would be the first step you would recommend to someone wanting to export to China? What's the first step that they should take?
They already have a product, right?
Already have a product.
Market research.
Okay. And where would they go for that?
Tally, go ahead.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, I mean, are you talking about, can we be a little more specific, like a small company in Tennessee, for example?
There might be a small company in Tennessee that looks to make skincare products and wants to sell to China.
Well, I think that the first step would be to, obviously, we should try to sell our own governmental services to contact which the U.S. Export Assistance Center. If it's in Knoxville, there's one in Nashville, right, correct? Knoxville, Nashville, or Memphis?
It would probably be Knoxville, the closest.
Knoxville, that would be the first inquiry that I would make if I were a young or upcoming business person in the Tennessee area. I mean, secondly, obviously the private sector is going to have a numerous, large number of consultants who would have a lot of knowledge based on their experiences actually in China that you'd want to reach out to. but I wouldn't want to say to you or your students or one of the business folks online, well, you should go to this X, Y, and Z company, over the commercial service. I think we offer a number of services that many companies could benefit from at a very reasonable price.
I think I would also reach out to some industry associations. There's going to be some that will have market research on industries. It would cost, but it's probably going to not cost much compared to what you're going to invest in exploring the Chinese market. And also check out presentations. There's always a lot of presentations. Once you reach out to that industry association, you'll be able to find a lot of presentations and webinars and stuff in that industry. So I would certainly do that as well.
Okay, and you just tell me when to stop. We've got some more. Here we've got, I think, a pretty good question. How much, in other words, there are lots of 20, 30-year-olds. Would the products they're interested in be similar to those in the U.S., or do you think there's going to have to be a lot of modification to consumer goods to fit peculiar Chinese tastes?
What I saw there, a lot of the stuff on the shelf, right now it's because they have some quality issues. You've got chemical issues in products and things like that. They're very big on if it's got a label on it that says it was made in Europe or it was made in the U.S. But it's a similar product. They're interested in the same thing our 20 and 30-year-olds are interested in: fun bags, fun shoes, clothes, healthcare products, skin products, things like that. It's the same products, but having it made overseas is a plus right now. But yeah, it's very similar products. You don't have to tailor them a lot. There's a baby growing interest in organic and healthcare, not nearly as big as it is here. Right now, it's pretty much simple what you would see if you walked through Nordstrom's or something like that.
Very good. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, Callie, did you want to chime in on that one? Hang on a second.
No, I would agree with Kathy totally. I think that the cachet of a foreign brand is very appealing to many young Chinese.
Very good. Okay. All right, here's another question. Would you say that the Chinese prefer face-to-face meetings, or are they pretty comfortable with virtual meetings?
Face-to-face.
Face-to-face. Overall. Okay, very good. All right. Is government graft, government corruption really a problem when trying to get things passed, get licenses or get building permits and things like that, and how do you handle it?
Foreign Corrupt Practices Act is a very big problem that you have to watch out for there. Fortunately, you've got lots of U.S. companies blazing a trail for you. So, in general, they know that U.S. companies can't bribe. It's also something you have to train your distributor for and things like that they can get you in trouble. It's tailoring down. It used to be rampant, and I say tailoring, meaning it's just started tailoring down in the last 2 years probably with a big government crackdown. But it's, like everything else in China, it's unevenly enforced. So you're going to run into some problems where they're going to want bribes and things like that, and you're going to have to say, I'm sorry, U.S. companies can't do that. Maybe you find some kind of workaround, talk to other U.S. companies that have been through this. I've actually put new companies on the phone with companies that are experienced in China to talk about how they deal with this. The other thing is Europe now has this you can't bribe policy as well. And so that's helping give us leverage in China because they too can't do it. But it is something you have to train your people there on so they can get you in trouble. It is dwindling, but if you go into the more remote parts of China or even out west, you might see it more than you will in Beijing or something. Cal, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would agree there also, but I think that, we're talking a lot about the fact that there's a lot of uneven, inconsistent enforcement of regulations in China and other types of legal basically laws. So I think that when a company, let's go back to, again, the specific, a small company in Tennessee is trying to export to Shenyang, which is in northeast China, their experience is going to be very, very different than if it's trying to export to Shanghai or to Sichuan province in western China. So that if you're trying to export or trying to enter the Chinese market, it's really, really important to realize that China is really like a series of many, many markets and almost like many, many countries, because of its overall very large size.
Okay, here's, I think, a very important question to ask, even though I said it was the last one, I didn't tell you the truth. What about websites? Do they need to be multilingual to sell to China, or is English ubiquitous enough that online shoppers will be able to understand and purchase products from English language websites?
It would really expand your market base greatly, exponentially, if you could do it in Chinese as well. And when you do it in Chinese, you want the simplified characters because there's traditional and simplified Chinese characters. Mainland China uses the simplified. Everybody else uses traditional. But really, China is one of those countries that you can't quite get by on English yet. So while you could sell to some cream of the crop folks, you're not really going to have a market unless you can do it in Chinese as well.
Thank you so much. I'll stop there with questions if you think I should.
Okay, great. Well, if that's all the written questions we have, please note that we will terminate our webinar for today. I'd just like to remind everyone that if you do have questions later on after this presentation, please note the contact information that's in front of your screen. You can contact Kathy and Natalie and also get onto the websites, which is a great site that we have that has a list of webinars, future webinars on www.export.gov, where you can also get more information on other topics. I'd like to thank our presenters. They did an excellent job, Dr. Peter Banfi, Kathy Feig, and Natalie Levine. I'd like to also thank all of our students and participants for joining us for today's webinar. And thank you, everybody, for participating, and we look forward to seeing you guys again. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.